morning and welcome to another episode of Dinosaurs and Mysteries. So in this episode we're going to look at the tale of the green children. Now if you've not heard of this before, this is a really interesting tale, and this more lies in the sort of tale folklore side of mysteries. Now there are witnesses and people that have actually studied this incident and these two children, but that's what we're going to talk about today, the tale of the green children. So in the 12th century, during the reign of the King Stephen, I believe, I've got a few notes here, there was a place in Suffolk called Woolpit, and every now and then they used to do a big harvest, and during one of the harvests, two children were actually discovered within one of the wool pits. Now, they have been described as wearing strange clothing, speaking an unusual language, and most of all, their skin was green. So, what happened after their discovery? So, according to William of Newburgh, the children were discovered in probably a place similar to this, in a wool pit during an annual harvest. Now, as I've said, they spoke a very obscure language, they dressed strangely, and their skin was all green. Now, there are many theories for what actually happened to these children, but I'm going to give the full story before I go into that. So, the alleged brother and sister were taken in by Richard de Carney. He brought them in, and they would have left the woods and forests similar to what I'm doing right now, and ended up somewhere probably not this extravagant. So Richard de Carney took them in, and they refused food for days until eventually they ate some broad beans, which apparently they indulged in. They absolutely wolfed these beans down, and it was the first thing they'd ate since he took them in. Now, there is a lot of speculation regarding this story and links to other similar incidences, but it's the description of how these children got to Woolpit that's the most fascinating bit, but we'll get to that in a bit. So the alleged brother and sister, allegedly, they grew to eat normal food and sort of adapt to a normal daily lifestyle, and the family that took them in decided that they were to be baptized, and unfortunately the brother, the youngest of the two, became very sickly and died before the baptism even took place. Now, the girl, she did somewhat better. She grew on to become a servant. She got employed as a servant, and she became married. So she married an official called Richard Barr, and lived about 40 miles away from Woolpit. Now, this is the part of the story that I love the most, is when she was asked how her brother and sister got there in Woolpit, how they got there and why they looked the way they looked and spoke the way they spoke. So the girl who led on to get married and become employed, apparently her name given to her was Agnes, and she learnt to speak English over time, and she actually gave an account of how her and her brother got to Woolpit. Now, I'm going to refer to my notes for this, because in my mind this is the most interesting part. So she learnt to speak English. They come from a land where the sun never shone and the light was like twilight. It was called St. Martin's Land, and everything was green. Now, one day they were herding their father's cattle, and they heard a loud noise apparently somewhat similar to St Edmund's Abbey church, Abbey's bells, and suddenly they were in Woolpit, but they got lost following cattle that led them into a cave, hearing the sound of the bells, and they emerged into a different land, that land being Woolpit. Now, a lot of people would think, okay, being led into a cave and then you're all of a sudden in a different land, people might think that sounds like a fairy tale, a folklore legend, and it does sound like it, and there's probably only a really small part of truth to this story, but it's absolutely fascinating, because since there are lots of different theories about this. Now, I've got the theories written down here. I'm just going to go over a few. So apparently the most popular theory in terms of realism and historical accuracy is that these children were descendants of Flemish immigrants, in which the parents were either persecuted or executed, and the children were left to fend for themselves and became malnourished and hadn't quite learned how to speak properly yet, and two kids bouncing off each other trying to learn how to communicate. Maybe they knew some words, but they had to get by themselves, so their speech sounded very unusual, and maybe their clothing, they'd had it for a while. That's one theory. There's another theory as well in relation to another similar folklore tale. So, different reality by a cave. So, entering a different reality via entering a cave. A boy was truanting from school one day, and a pygmy, whatever that is, apparently led him to a cave, and once he was within that cave, he all of a sudden was in a forest land full of forests and rivers, and the sun wasn't lighting the atmosphere. It was like a twilight. It was very similar to what the Agnes from the alleged Green Children reported. Now, again, this all sounds like a fairy tale and folklore, and it probably is. But obviously, this woman led on to get married and work and live a very normal life. So I can't see why she would lie. But then again, when you're a child, you remember things very differently, especially if you don't understand the world. But I think this is an absolutely fascinating tale. Whether it is a tale and just a bit of folklore, but some of you may not have heard this. And today, with all the mysteries I talk about, we do have, alleged small people or mole people that live within a secret cave system. Again, allegedly. So if people are to look into and make documentaries about that, then what's to say that this isn't as interesting? So I've been wanting to make a video about this for not for months, for probably about 2 years now, and I've just done it. So if you've enjoyed this little folklore tale, if you want more like this, from centuries years old, that aren't about vampires and not about cryptids, I'm sorry, I've just noticed the composition for a photograph, then please subscribe to my channel. And if there's any other tales or folklore legends or just cryptids that I talk about quite a lot, let me know in the comments. Please subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and have a chat. Please comment in below. Let me know of any folklore tales you've heard of, or if there's any cryptid creatures you want me to cover. And please keep it respectful. I recently had someone say about big cats in the UK, you're all deluded, you shouldn't have had the COVID jab. So try and be respectful in the comments. Luckily those type of comments are few and far. So yeah, anyway, hope you've enjoyed this one, and as always, stay safe.